I'm joined now by Opadeji Opakunle, Head Global Macro and Commodity Markets at Kindness Edge Consulting, to review some of our top stories in more detail. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Great to be speaking to you. So let's start with these revised global growth forecasts by the OECD. That's good news, from 2.9% to 3.2%. So what's driving this revised, more positive outlook?
Interestingly, to fully analyze the OECD forecast, it will be good to parse the data properly to understand where the touch points for the global economy are. But as a precedence to this, we need to understand that below 2.5%, it means that the global economy is in trouble. And that always portends a global recession. And so from 2.9% going to 3.3 is fantastic, right? But however, when you compare the forecast for next year and the preceding forecast for this year, there is still a slight 0.1% difference, 3.3, 3.2. And so that doesn't entirely say that everything is rosy. But on the one hand, you have to look at the United States with their tariffs, and then you also have to look at India and Russia. There has been a lot of, should I say, silent conflict and loud conflict between the United States and India. And that's because you have oil coming from Russia into India. However, India seems to be resilient regardless of the problems they've had externally with the United States. On the one hand, you have the H-1B visas, which you have $100,000 being announced as the fee for the visas, which to a large extent says that you have the highly talented individuals coming from India to the US. That is going to, draw down. And so that means remittances, which is almost $100 billion to India, it might not be what you expect.
So essentially, if you were to sort of pin down one major driver for why next year's forecast may not be as, you think that the Trump trade tariffs may be a key factor in weighing down on global growth and all the things that come with that?
Yes, I do think so, because the last GDP numbers for the US was above 3%, about 3.3%.
Right.
Everyone expected it to be less because of the effects of the tariffs. But however, regardless of that, they still had good growth. And so that means, by extension, globally, we have a good forecast.
Sure.
But we still need to realize that, or we need to figure out how much lag is going to be between the tariffs and the effect on the overall economy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's something to watch out for. So now the H-1B visas, which have been talk of many blog posts, online journals, $100,000 per year for new H-1B worker. Why is this such a big deal?
For me, I'll put it in two silos. On the one hand, the United States is trying to control inflation. We saw inflation.
Inflation?
Yes, they were trying to.
Not immigration.
No, not immigration. On the one hand, and by talking about inflation, I'm talking about the long-term effects.
Okay, explain that to us.
If you take away the individuals who are migrants, economic migrants into the U.S., usually highly trained, right? They are high earners in the economy, but a lot of their cash is going remittances to India, to China, to Nigeria, and the rest of the world, right? But if you cut out that sector of the economy and then replace with American workers, wages rise for Americans, but inflation, if wages rise, then they have their work cut out for them in terms of inflation. That's in one silo. On the other hand, what then happens to a country like China? China has opened the door for the K visa, which is an alternative for the H-1B visa now. And these are the things that, the OECD is looking at. If other doors are opening for these migrants, workers, for these economic migrants, and then it means that, there might be moderation.
But I have to ask you, because you said this is a strategy to control inflation. If wages are rising, that's a trigger for inflation.
Oh, no. On the contrary, not a strategy to combat inflation. I mean, the resultant effects in the long run, will be inflation.
Okay, I understand.
When you think about the higher wages that would come to the American people when they are taking these jobs that the American government wants for Americans, because it's America first.
Long term, but also the dimension that this actually opens an opportunity for other economies to benefit from these migrants, such as China.
With
interesting time. So gold prices have hit record highs. Is it just that investors are dumping the US dollar Help us understand what's going on here.
So gold, I find gold very interesting, especially because over the past half decade and up to a decade, you've had U.S. Treasuries or investments in U.S. Treasuries thinning out. But this has been continually replaced by gold. And on the one hand, you have the U.S., who has been aggressive to countries like Russia, kicking them off SWIFT, Syria off SWIFT, Iran. And this, to a large extent, says to the central banks around the world, what do? We can't hold U.S. Treasuries. Our resources, our assets could be frozen at any time if we're not in good terms with the U.S. And so central banks, who are the major purchasers or the major drivers for the demand for gold, are purchasing more gold and less U.S. Treasuries, particularly China. And then after the U.S. Treasuries, you have to think about jewelry. The jewelry market in China and India are growing fantastic. But when you look at China holistically, and then you look at the rest of the world acquiring gold, and then you look at the US dollar index, the US dollar index has been dropping this year, down 18% this year. And think about it, the United States economy is on a tripod of three cardinal factors. On the one hand, you have cheap goods from China, that is gone, because tariffs have come in from China. Even though China in the long run has proved to be resilient, their exports haven't dropped. But the Chinese foreign minister was very bold to say that the US only receives 12 to 15% of our exports, and so they do not care. And so that means that they have alternatives for their export market, and that drives global growth on the one hand. But the money that they were pushing into US Treasuries is now going into gold.
Yeah.
So gold prices are rising because of the fear or the global uncertainty around the United States and how they want to handle policy with the international markets and international investments into US Treasuries. And so if the United States, as it's rumored all over economic circles, that they want to rebalance their debts and probably reprice gold, because right now on the balance sheet of the US, gold is priced at $42 an ounce. But currently we have gold touching $3,700, right? So for Nigerian women, our mommy echoes that have buy a lot of gold, they are becoming billionaires, some of them without even knowing.
Absolutely, because I imagine the secondary value of those assets would be quite significant. Interesting, very, very fascinating discussion here. Let's switch from global to local. 50 basis points, maybe a few points on that, because we have a more extensive discussion with someone else later in the show. But really, I mean, your main interpretation of this decision by the CBN?
So to a large extent, the CBN is testing the waters. Mr. Yemi Cardoso, fantastic CBN governor, had made it clear from the get-go that we're going back to orthodox monetary policy. No more speculation, and they're going to fight inflation. The mandate of the CBN is around inflation, unemployment, and ensuring that there's growth with respect to the GDP. When you follow the timeline of the tightening of the monetary policy over the past 18 months, it's been a factor of, it's gone from below 20% to 27%, from about 16, 17% to 27%, and 27.5, and now back to 27. They had testing the waters, but however, you have to realize, when you pass the data, you see that they're still managing liquidity very aggressively. So even though they're leaving some leeway to ensure that, especially because inflation has moderated, they're leaving some leeway. But like my principal, Dr. Adedoyin Salami, always says, we'll wait for the base effects next year.
Absolutely.
Because when you want to talk about inflation, you have to compare apples and apples. The inflation numbers have been rebased, but it might not be the best idea to compare a year-on-year inflation at the moment. You would wait till next year because it was rebased this year, and by January next year, we then look at January versus January.
Okay, well, that's an interesting point, because then we still have another MPC meeting this year. So there's an expectation. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of analysts saying, some people have even suggested up to 100 basis points.
Yeah,
right? So,
especially because the US dropped rates and around the world, different
Yes.
countries dropped. Although Singapore held rates, Japan held rates, but lots of countries are dropping rates. You know, the US sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. But that might not be the case with Nigeria, right? But they're testing the waters, and if the base effects really, really tell the story that we hope by all means it tells, 100 basis points might be in the offing.
Fantastic. Zach Adedeji, FRS, has said 411% increase in federal revenues in September. Like, what is this? Like, what is going on? Of course, there's the whole revenue versus debt thing, but you know, he said the fiscal reforms, compliance mechanisms, is better tax collection. Tell us what's going on here.
Yes, better tax collection, because you have Mr. Zach and his team really took their time to look into the whole tax system before they resumed office. They were having meetings upon meetings. They were prepared for the job, right? And then you had the FIRS Act, even though it's not going to come into effect till next year, so we expect more. But I think the right question to ask is, what in dollar terms have we grown? We were as high as $2-3 billion a month in terms of revenue, but in naira terms, nominal terms, we've grown. But in real terms, have we?
3.65 trillion now.
Yeah, and it's important to note, especially for Nigerians listening, that we're Nigerians, we spend naira, not dollar, but as a country, we spend dollar because our debt servicing is in dollar. And so whether we like it or not, you, me, everyone, we're paying for it one way or the other, Indeed. Right? And so it will be interesting to see that this increases over time in real terms. Yeah. And most importantly, like Dr. Ayoteriba had mentioned earlier, what we're experiencing is more or less an exchange rate problem at the moment. And that has stabilized. If they are able to manage FX volatility, which the CBN has made it clear that they're going to fight that, and interestingly, you look at the GP numbers in Q2 went up, right? And in that same Q2, the numbers for FX interventions were going down, and so that is good to say about, you know, pretty much the FX rates.
Okay, interesting. I was going to probe you more on that, but we've run out of time. Thank you so much for being with us, Opadeji of Kindness Edge Consulting. Great to have you on the show.